Greetings, Guardians. And welcome back to Olympus Alliance. Today, we have a very interesting Titan to talk about. But before we get into his abilities, there's something you need to know. Because this Titan has not appeared in Hero Wars Alliance. Instead, he has appeared in the Facebook and web version of Hero Wars, now known as Hero Wars Dominion Era. And his name is Valdur, a mysterious new summoner with a very unusual ability and an even more unusual element. Because according to the information currently available, Valdur belongs to the element Distortion. And that's where things get interesting for us. Because here in Hero Wars Alliance, our new Titan element is Elarit. So naturally, the question becomes, could Valdur eventually make his way into Hero Wars Alliance? Or is he simply a Titan created specifically for the web version of the game? Today, we're going to take a closer look at Valdur. What exactly he does. How his summoner mechanics work. What makes his echo so interesting? And why, despite the fact that he currently belongs to Distortion, I think there's a possibility we could eventually see a version of him in Alliance. Now, before we continue, let's make one thing absolutely clear. This is speculation. There is currently no confirmation that Valdur is coming to Hero Wars Alliance. The fact that he exists in the web version does not automatically mean that Alliance will receive him. The two versions of Hero Wars have developed separately for quite some time, with different heroes, mechanics, and content. So, for now, we're simply looking at the clues. And Valdur certainly gives us something to talk about. So let's begin. Who is Valdur? Valdur is presented as a summoner, positioned in the middle line. And his entire design seems to revolve around one mysterious companion. Echo. Even his description gives us a clue. Wherever the breach opens, Valdur and Echo are never far behind. And this isn't just part of his story. Echo is actually connected to his combat mechanics. His first skill is called Echoclasm. When Valdur uses this ability, he summons one lesser image next to each living enemy Titan. These images then take reduced damage from area of effect attacks. So instead of simply attacking the enemy team directly, Valdur creates additional entities on the battlefield. And this is where his mechanics become really interesting. Because when one of these images dies, it deals damage to a nearby enemy Titan, and knocks the closest enemy Titan backwards. Think about that for a moment. Valdur is not simply summoning something that sits there and absorbs damage. His echoes can actually change enemy positioning. They can create additional pressure, deal damage when they disappear, and disrupt the enemy formation. And if new images are summoned while the previous ones are still alive, the old images die, and are replaced by the new ones. So Valdur appears to be constantly creating, and replacing these echoes throughout the battle. That gives him a very different identity from a traditional damage dealer. He's a summoner, but he's also a battlefield control Titan. And then we have his second ability. Spiritual Bond, Distortion. This is probably the most important part of Valdur's current design. Valdur and Echo count as two Distortion Titans for totem activation. And they generate additional energy for the Distortion totem thanks to mastery. Which brings us back to our original question. What happens if Valdur ever comes to Alliance? Because right now, His entire design is connected to Distortion. But Alliance uses Elarit. And that means Valdur couldn't necessarily arrive exactly as he appears in the web version. At least, not without some changes. And this is where the speculation begins. Could Valdur become an Elarite Titan? Imagine the developers take Valdur. Keep his summoner identity. Keep Echo. Keep the battlefield control mechanics. But change his elemental identity from Distortion to Elarit. Suddenly, Valdur could potentially become a completely different type of Titan for Alliance. And honestly, I think this is much more interesting than simply copying the web version. Because Alliance already has its own elemental system. Elarite Titans have their own interactions and can synergize with Titans from other elements. So if Valdur were ever adapted, the developers could potentially redesign his totem interaction, change his elemental bonuses, and perhaps even modify Echo to fit the Alliance system. And that doesn't necessarily mean his core identity would have to disappear. The Echo mechanic could remain. The summoner role could remain. The middle line position could remain. And the ability to manipulate enemy positioning could remain. Only the way he interacts with the Alliance elemental system would need to change. And that is exactly why I think Valdur is worth watching. But there's another interesting detail. Look at what makes Valdur different. He doesn't appear to be another Titan whose entire purpose is simply dealing enormous amounts of damage. His strength seems to come from creating additional targets, manipulating positioning, and using Echo to constantly disrupt the enemy formation. That could potentially give Alliance something very different. A summoner that changes how the battlefield itself works. And if the developers are looking for new ways to expand Elarit, a Titan like Valdur could fit that purpose extremely well. But again, we have to be careful. The fact that a Titan exists in Dominion era does not mean Alliance will receive it. We've seen many differences between the two versions of Hero Wars. So we shouldn't say Valdur is coming, because we simply don't know that yet. Instead, the real question is, could Valdur be adapted for Alliance? And personally, I think it's absolutely possible. But there is one thing we would need to see first. Elarit. If we eventually see Valdur mentioned alongside the Elarite Titans, if his totem interaction changes, or if we see an Alliance-specific version of his abilities, then the theory becomes much stronger. Until then, Valdur remains a very interesting Titan from the web version, and a very interesting possibility for our game. So, Guardians, what do you think? Should Valdur come to Hero Wars Alliance? Would you like to see his Echo mechanics brought into our version? And most importantly, would you keep him as Distortion, if that were possible, or would you prefer an Elarite version of Valdur designed specifically for Alliance? Let me know in the comments. Because if the developers really are planning to bring some of these newer mechanics from Dominion era into Alliance, Valdur could be just the beginning. We'll keep watching every new Titan, every new element, every new mechanic, and every clue that could tell us what's coming next to Hero Wars Alliance. Stay tuned, stay sharp, and as always, salute and friendship.